Hey everyone, this is part 2 of my discussion with Kenneth Jeng. For those who missed part 1, we have a link in the description. This episode is recorded in November 2024.
I want to dive into the Japan startup ecosystem challenges and gaps, but please give me your hot take.
So one area that I would like to emphasize today is one that I think is one of the biggest and under-discussed issues here, which is that ultimately startup ecosystems are really about the people, right? And the talent that's involved here. And my sense here is that a lot of the people who would typically be involved in successful international startup ecosystems elsewhere aren't really involved in it here. And I think it's a pretty big can of worms digging into like why that's the case.
Cool. And I'd like to hear, yeah, this is a really good topic because I think at least with the Japanese shoshas, like if you want to make like a Japanese restaurant overseas, I think like Sushiro, I forgot which chain, but some chains are doing really good overseas. Like even Santoka, the ramen shop from Asahika, where I live in Hokkaido. I was in Manila. I just saw, I was like, wait, isn't that the ramen chain just right next to us? But like you have these shosha people who just have like 30 years of experience just creating, expanding Japanese businesses overseas. But from startups in Japan, let's say, you know, yeah, there's kind of, I guess, some talent, or I'll let you kind of go into, I guess, what are some of the people who would be typically be involved in the ecosystem, and maybe why aren't they doing it here?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tyson. One thing that I've noticed, first and foremost, like you mentioned the show shop people, right? It's like I think the reality is that there are all sorts of different Japanese organizations in general that have been quite successful internationally, right? And so like I think it goes to say that it's quite possible to build global companies from Japan in all sorts of different industries, right? It's just that a lot of that talent hasn't really percolated into the startup ecosystem. So to kind of dig into like the couple of demographics that I think are deeply involved in leading startup ecosystems abroad and aren't really here, there's a few. So the first one is the global diaspora of the country. So think about you look at China, you look at Korea, you look at Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc. Like a significant portion of founders, investors, leading operators are a lot of people who have spent significant time abroad, right? Kind of US, UK educated all the time, a lot of kikokushijo, so like kind of returnees and whatnot. Even like some of the earliest like catalysts to certain ecosystems like Korea, so like Kupang and whatnot, or like your Sequoia Chinas had significant portions of the diaspora involved. And insofar as I can tell in Japan, that's not really the case, right? Other I think other groups of people that are deeply involved here are people like immigrants. Obviously, I think in almost any single country are a big source of entrepreneurial activity, and that's actually still the case in Japan. Although I feel like it's in many ways pretty underleveraged still. And I think the last area is I see that a lot of like country managers and other domestic talents working at international startups or like kind of these foreign capital companies, right? Big tech embassies and whatnot. They're not involved in Japan founded startups at all, right? So like you don't really see, for instance, somebody go from like a Stripe Japan or a LinkedIn Japan or things like that to domestic startups, which again feels like a big shame.
Yeah, I've met some really impressive people, and I was like, "Oh, who do you work for?" "Oh, Deloitte Tomas." I was like, no, like why can't?" And he's like, "Yeah, you're senior level. I understand why you're senior level." I was like, "Can't you be doing something cooler?"
I know, right? It's like
Uh,
not to hate on Deloitte, right? But like, it's kind of true across the board, right? I went to like this kind of university alumni gathering kind of thing a couple weeks ago, and had some of the most interesting conversations, like extremely bright, multilingual people. Some of them quite young as well, who like were lucky to do something dynamic, and they were working at places like Morgan Stanley, like Goldman, and you're like that's great. And but it feels like a big shame, right? That the startup ecosystem really isn't you know, kind of drawing from their talents.
And I think the other one too, like I have some Japanese friends who like great salespeople, and they're involved in they're usually serving as country manager, selling something sometimes kind of boring. It's like, oh my God, startups really need your talent, like someone like you who could just sell. And
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like that's one of the things again, I think we'll come back to this topic is that, I think sometimes you hear a refrain about like, oh, a lot of kind of these international stakeholders or people with background, like they don't really get Japan, it'll be hard for them to figure that out. I don't think that's actually the case, right? It's just like, there are a lot of Japanese organizations that have been able to make use of these folks. There are a lot of international companies that have been able to succeed massively in Japan with this kind of talent. The people who brought like Slack here or like your Salesforces or even going even earlier, your Microsofts and Googles and whatever. Like clearly there's a way to succeed using this like fantastic talent. And I think a lot of the ways they would be the kind of talent that would be great at bringing Japan-made stuff abroad as well.
and I guess what is your take on why they don't get as involved in the startup industry?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a sensitive topic, right? Because I think it comes down to uh, three things. The first one is pretty typical and I think visible one, which is risk reward, incentives, compensation is insofar as it just simply just pays better by an order to work at a lot of these companies, it's oftentimes very difficult for these people to make the switch, right? I think the argument here is that as more capital is flowing into Japanese startups and whatnot, that this is a solvable problem, right? And as long as there's
Yeah.
those norms for incentivizing these people a little better and healthy stock option programs and whatnot, then it'd be possible to hire them.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there.
Yeah. I think a second one that this is the one that is a little bit less obvious, right? Is kind of just simple outreach, which is oftentimes the sense is that people kind of live in different social universes here. I think there is a sense that Japan in general, and I think especially Tokyo, where a lot of this stuff is kind of a city of subcultures, right? Which means that there's also a lot of siloing socially. Again, it's a massive city. Like the metro area is like 36 million people. There's no way that we'd be expected to know everybody. But I find it rare that people kind of reach beyond these different silos. I think that people who manage to do that become like very useful and very valuable, right? I think Tyson, you yourself is kind of somebody who's been able to kind of across like different silos to find like really unique opportunities, right?
Yes, and just kind of or I guess as a generalist, but let's say a generalist who can combine things and also create new innovative ideas by bringing people together, or let's say combining different methods that work in other areas into some areas.
Like you're a small business owner, you're a strong operator. Now you kind of and then you went into like 500, 100 startups to be a mentor, getting startups. Now you're a content creator. That's like a very dynamic blend of things that I think I see a little bit less of. Is like people who act as this connective tissue, right, and the channels between these different pools of talent. And that takes a lot of effort, right, to kind of for in a lot of cases step outside your original kind of comfort zone. And so like, that's kind of one encouragement I would make is like trying to break past like your original like kind of social circles and whatnot to get great talent. Which gets me to like the third point, which I think is the least discussed here,
Mm,
which is vibes, right? Which is like kind of the norm, cultural norms, interpersonal like interactions, body language, things,
yeah.
stuff like that. Is that I think it's it's a tricky challenge, right? To try to create the right kind of environment in which you appeal to both people coming from a domestic background and these people coming from this insider, outsider, inside international background, in which like they feel like they're joining a team that speaks to them, that is filled with their people, right? And it's like a great cultural fit. And I feel like Japan is a place where that is a bigger challenge than it is perhaps in like even some of our other Asian neighbors.
Yeah, it's I think it is really hard to find that a lot of people are very passionate for their hobbies. So you have a lot of unique hobby groups, sometimes that might be even more niche than what you might find like in the US. But yeah, to find a lot of people really passionate for a problem where they'll risk, like everything, join early stage because they're so passionate for that problem. So what I'm starting to notice, and I do have Japanese people who reach out to me on LinkedIn, but mentioning that they've been on the outside, they want to help Japan internationalize and become more competitive, but not sure exactly how they can help. And so I think in our case, at least with One Coin English, it was really easy for us to attract people who are like passionate about Japan needs to speak more English.
Hmm.
And so I think it was really easy for us to find people with that specific pain point. But I don't feel that or like, let's say, Japan has really tapped into the people, like or those who that did go overseas, but actually do want to help. They just don't know how exactly they can have an impact. Like,
Yeah, there.
like from a clear, not from like a feeling point of view, like I just want to help like someone who could actually, these are the steps that has been proven in other markets. You should do this. And I feel that type of guidance is really lacking.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Like kind of people who have been there and done that a little bit, right? So one recent example I would bring up is if if you're chronically online like I am and you're reading LinkedIn, there's been a huge upswelling of support for stuff like Techstars, right? When Techstars Tokyo launched its program, like every other day, I would be somebody see a post by somebody be like, "Oh, I'm so happy to be like a mentor at like Techstars Tokyo," right? I'm just like, wow, there's like like 50 people on my feed are jumping out of these random corners to try to get involved. And to be honest, like in recent years, that's been hugely my experience as well, which is like there are increasing groups of people both inside Japan and outside Japan who would love to help, who would love to get involved in some way. And all that's needed for them to get involved is frankly just like people reaching out to them with like slightly interesting slash credible platforms and opportunities, right? And that's where I think stuff like 500 and Techstars and some of these other programs, I don't think it's about like copy pasting like Silicon Valley playbooks completely, right? And things like that. I think part of it is creating that kind of trust and familiarity, right? And to some degree, like credibility, that people feel comfortable like lending their name to.
Yeah. No, it's I can definitely see it for Techstars. People ask me all the time, like, how can I do mentoring for 500? And they do want to get involved. I guess what I do like about Techstars and Antler, I do like how they're actually bringing in money
Hmm.
and like actually funding these companies and giving them a decent deal. But what I'm kind of looking forward, like if I hope Techstars continues, like so shout out to Yuki, who's running the program, and Antler as well, because I feel like, or especially if they get to like cohort 5, cohort 7, I think they'll have enough of a network where there'll be some success cases and the Techstars network will start helping each other. And I think that's probably something that, like just really niche. There are some pretty good brands, but like brands who have successfully helped create Japanese startups that have succeeded overseas.
Yeah. I think what we need the most right now is talent and expertise and programs that are locally grounded but internationally connected, right? I think up to this point, I think there's been a lot of great efforts and a lot of well-meaning people and programs and whatnot up to this point. So no shade to them, right? But there is a distinct, I think, lack of that specific angle where you have people who are, committed to this market and have like a decent amount of local knowledge, right? Or like an organization that brings that while also being able to code switch and be organically credible and
Mm.
well connected abroad and be able to tap on like a lot of the very deep expertise in these areas and where in areas where like frankly speaking like they just simply don't exist in Japan.
Yeah, like I mean I know that agile and like product management methodology has been seeking into Japan, but in terms of sale, so I know there's still a gap there, but at least that has been moved. A lot of companies recognize it, but probably definitely still a gap for traditional companies. But I think across the board, especially the sales and marketing end,
Yep.
like having a world class and like and what I experienced is that, I mean, for SEO, I would say there's a lot of really good SEOs in Japan, but SEO has been out there for like 15, 20 years. So
Yeah.
they've had time to kind of gain that knowledge. There are some new updates, but their base is still showing it up. But I think for other areas of marketing, like what's it, account-based marketing in B2B or like sales, like automate, like really high sales automation or just really like high closing rates. That I think is definitely lacking. And like and I think what I used to joke with uh my clients, or I still joke about it, is that I can just probably every 2 to 3 years, I can just binge for like 2 months on what's being done in the US, and that's going to last me for the next. So I can actually be a generalist. What I love about Japan is I can actually be a generalist, because if I was in the US, no, if I was doing sales, I would really, because things are moving so quickly, I need to be doing so many experience to be ahead of the curve, that I really need specialization. But so I'd say yes, I think you can get away with it in Japan. Just, every 2, 3 months, binge on one area, and you'll probably be ahead of the curve for like 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, no, I absolutely no, I feel the same thing here. And I think this phenomenon goes beyond a couple of these areas we've discussed into basically every area. On this last trip to San Francisco, I spent more than an hour talking to a friend who's a kind of director of engineering at a kind of first round capital Series
Ah,
B startup, right? It's
gotcha.
scaled up quite a bit. It's like a very, very high performance
Yeah.
organization. And that hour talking to him about like his philosophy around like engineering and the value add and the role of engineers, plus like the way that he's thinking about like talent assessment, acquisition, and upskilling people was it was like extremely enlightening, right? It's like I hadn't heard that depth of thinking about it, frankly, in Japan. And so like listening to him, I was like, dude, man, you got to write this stuff, right? It's just like we would love to see some of this stuff shared. The sense I get is like a lot of the commonly shared like frameworks and things that you just mentioned get you to kind of the starting point. And then it's when you get like the actually company by company stories and like the detailed
Yes.
thinking is where like it really comes to life. And that's what like we really need in a lot of these companies. Or also I feel like a lot of people are like trying to apply the frameworks and then just kind of like groping around in the dark
Yes,
or like
yes,
reinventing the
yes.
wheel. Yeah.
And that's been my pain. Yeah, it's because it just takes so much time to, let's say, I mean, you have to go through kind of like that PDCA cycle. You go through it several times and you kind of get, but if you could just have someone guiding you the way, it would just save so much, especially for these newer types of areas.
Yep.
Like, like more established areas like SEO or AdWords, a lot of the methodologies is pretty much just been set for years. So I could find pretty good information and practical experience. But yeah, like how to set up like let's say what sorry, account-based marketing that's that's extremely new to Japan, and like you'd be hard pressed to find someone who has already proven that model for Japan.
Yeah, or even, like what exactly is like product marketing, right? Versus like classical. It feels like,
Yeah,
a lot of time it's like folded into the same person in the same role. And it's like very hard to be good at, all those things, right? Let alone be familiar across the board.
yeah, it's so I think that let's say just that acknowledgement of actually what is world class, and I think that's kind of unless they they welcome more of these let's say people from world class companies in and kind of showing. So I know that was something you were trying to do, right? I think
Yeah.
with I think you did some seminars. You
I
brought the growth hacking guy, I think.
There was the growth hacking guy who I didn't bring in, but like early in the year I did a workshop featuring the former chief revenue officer of Asana, who also led like kind of APAC for Dropbox back in the day.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Quite interesting. One last thing on this topic that I'd like to emphasize is that like, rising tide raises all ships, right? Sometimes I get the sense that some people are a little bit antsy, about their own positions potentially disappearing or like being competed away. But like my contention here is that, the involvement of a lot of these groups of people would grow the pie for everybody, right? It's like if we 10x the size of these companies and 10x the number of companies, and they bring in critical knowledge, perspectives, and relationships to help these companies be successful. That brings in more capital, and I would argue like more opportunities for everybody involved in the space. And if people have been here early and established themselves, then you're in a great position to benefit from this. And you want any proof, right? Look at the success of even Japan-based companies like your PayPays and Paydees and PTixes, Sakai AIs, Mujin, Josys, like highly international teams, right? Oftentimes with like international founders involved that have been able to do this kind of back and forth insider outsider thing to hit pretty large outcomes for everybody involved.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on with that. Who can do that insider outsider?
Yeah.
So you've kind of covered like the issues with some of the ecosystem challenges and gaps. And then, so I guess what are some things people could do to contribute for the community? Before we dive in, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, AIM B2B, and recommend them for anyone entering or expanding in Asia's intricate B2B market. AIM B2B is Tokyo's leading integrated marketing and PR agency. Since 2008, they've helped global brands thrive across Japan and APAC through intelligent strategies, data-driven implementation, and cultural expertise. Their proven adapt, implement, maximize framework builds trust through localized storytelling and drives measurable growth through strategic performance marketing. They're HubSpot certified, seasoned in account based marketing, paid media, GEO, SEO, and more. Ready to expand? That's AIM B2B. Always forward. Give a shout out to Robert and the team for supporting this podcast. Now back to the show.
Yeah. So in terms of actionable steps, right? I think there are three gaps here. There, I think number one, community. Uh, Currently, my sense is that there isn't really like a central singular place that is like the go-to place for kind of internationally competitive startups and talent, right? Again, Tokyo is a big city, and I think there have been a number of like good attempts, right? And
Hmm.
places like CIC that are serving as a physical location, but the sense I have is that there isn't like a single place that you can consistently go to for that has the highest concentration and like at least 80% of everybody in the space there that's like curated and high quality and such like that. Um, I think a second thing is like functional content and resources. So like, Tyson, I know you've been very active in like creating a lot of this stuff. I think there's a huge need for this, like across the board, right? Some of it is like Japan specific, but there's also a lot of stuff I think for both that we need to create both in English and Japanese, which is like how do you expand to these countries in Asia, right? Or like how do you sequence international market expansion efforts as a Japan-based companies? How do you think about engineering, outsource? What kind of resources can you tap into domestically and abroad? Um, there's a saying that I think the English language internet is something like 60% of the global internet,
Yeah.
right? And in terms of like startup thought leadership and content, I feel like it's like 95%. Which means like there's probably like too much English language thought leadership but like also like way too little like Japanese thought leadership. I know that there are a lot of people do fighting the good fight of creating good content in Japanese on like publishing on notes and stuff, but I haven't really seen the kind of aggregation of resources, right? It's kind of scattered. I think we have all the right pieces, but we need it more easily accessible. We also need just more of it, right?
And yeah, 'cause I've been kind of wondering if it might actually have to be a founder to kind of just organize all of this.
I think it needs to be a founder or a investor, right? And
Yeah, invest. No, yes, invest. I've seen some good examples of investors, in the U.S. case.
yeah, so some of the most amazing aggregations and like well curated, well published content that I've seen are by VCs like Index Ventures, which is like a US or Europe VC. Check out their stuff. It's absolutely world-class kind of resources on international go-to-market with like pulling on data, interviews. They built like a beautiful web app to make it easy to understand. They came up with their own or original frameworks for helping European startups figure out like when to go to the US, where to station their executives, where the founder should be based, right? What headcount versus like revenue breakdown should be depending on your profile and kind of company you are, right? It's absolutely incredible. I've never seen anything of that level of depth. Not just in Japan, right? But like regarding Asia, period.
Well, they're actually narrowing it down by regions now. That's the maturity level.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
really cool.
And
I think you mentioned first round as well, right?
first round, like really, really good content, right? Very, very good publishing arm there. There's a saying that VC is just like branded money, right? And like VC firms are in a sense like kind of marketing firms for the branded money. Um, but the reality is like some of them have gotten like so good at marketing themselves as like repositories of deep expertise and knowledge. I think there's something to it. There's like real substance there that they build on their team and also in terms of content.
Yeah, like no, that would be amazing in the Japan case. I mean, where they could or the positives would be they have the passion for it, they have the experience for it. But what I do like the VC side is where they've had enough portfolio companies where they could just compile best practices. So I'm kind of passionate from, of course, because I'm doing it myself. But yeah, when you mention investor, like I totally can see the huge advantage they can bring as well is being like the aggregator.
Yeah. One thing that I'm always kind of worried about is like I know a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who are like these passionate kind of community builders and like content creators and whatnot who are founders. And like what I'm worried about the most is like people burning out. Right? It's just like because it's so much work on top of running like an existing business.
Yes.
And like
Same.
incentive alignment only goes so far, I think, when you're a founder, right? It's just like, um, and it's like people are super gung-ho about it. Their heart is in the right place. But like at some point, like the returns you personally get from it versus the value that you're creating is becomes pretty lopsided. And so
I would
like, yeah,
say I agree 100%. It's I mean like I've literally spent like 40 to $50,000 creating content for the startup community and it's like like I know some of the cities they have like so I mean like and you guys haven't featured me like I spent 50,000 of my own money
I
like
know, right?
creating
It's just
content.
like
It's like
Please, man, like do
Please.
something to elevate these people. And like what I found in some cases, like some of the people who did the absolute best like community slash tech events in Tokyo, like got so burnt out by it, like their experience and the lack of kind of support that they were getting, that they literally just left Japan. Not gonna name any names here, but like some
Gotcha.
things that from the past. And like, there's a road full of like the corpses of these like formerly successful communities that got amazing people together, where the person just like at some point threw up their hands and just like, I can't do this anymore.
And I can think of some that has decrease. And so kind of my thought was, I guess one possibility, but something that didn't manifest. I know that like Tokyo Metro, like they gave out a huge amount of money. Like, do you know how many like millions? Like 50 million or like I'm not sure if it's in the hundreds of millions like
Yeah,
last
it
year
was like a grant for like 10 million yen per program or something like
program or
that.
something like that.
Something, yeah. No, the money is coming, right? And Jetro has huge budgets for this. They've been bringing all sorts of different programs, some with like people with more local roots, as well as people coming from abroad with programs. So I think the money is there, albeit with strings attached to try to back some of these things. And so like perhaps there's a way to make these things businesses their own rights.
Mm.
That there are two kinds of organizations that I think would be best situated to do this kind of work. One was like VCs, right, which we talked about. The second one is basically like nonprofits or like government organizations that are incentivized to do this work because it's their mandate. I think the challenge with them there though is might turn into box ticking exercise because you don't have like the long-term incentive to drive
Mm.
outcomes, right? Unless you can try to figure that out sometimes, and like somehow with like contracts that are structured a certain way, that'd be great. But in the long run, I think there's a case for both to exist to plug different kinds of
Yeah.
holes, and like good outcomes can be generated. And of course, like founders being involved brings a lot of like the war stories and the credibility, and like founders are the people who have like actually built a business, right? Like by and large, like VC investors have not. Kind of uncomfortable laughter there, right? So they shouldn't be the people telling people what to do in an operating context is something that like I pretty strongly believe.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I agree because I think when it comes to like nuanced conversations, you really need to talk to the people who have the experiences of doing it. But I also agree on the other end, like where the VCs can serve as the arbitrator of best practices that
Yes.
of generally accepted methodologies that work.
Yeah. 100%. And so, all this kind of brings me to, I think the last thing that I think everybody can do together, right? Which is, I've also found to be somewhat lacking in Japan, which is storytelling, right? Like kind of
Mm.
building and evangelizing a narrative for the entire ecosystem. So if you're active at all on like Twitter, right, and you follow people like Gary Tan of YC, it's really fascinating
Ah,
to like follow him and his tribe and some other people like that is because they are, despite the eminence and prominence of San Francisco
yeah.
and they are talking about San Francisco as the place to be all the time. They do not stop, right?
Gotcha.
They're so good at like branding it. Like, there was a time when like Silicon Valley seemed to be like on like right before the AI boom, like things were super down. Like kind of Web3 crypto didn't really work out. Streets are emptying out. There are all these social problems. And they came out and with a couple weeks of like ChatGPT coming out, they came up with this entire branded concept of like cerebral valley, which is like
Oh, that does, yeah.
Valley in Silicon Valley. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, like going and visiting there, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have like all these people who go there to like in search of Cerebral Valley, and then they go and meet and have these cool conversations with the other people that they meet who were also just attracted there by the idea of Cerebral Valley. Everybody's a transplant, and they just became a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're
Gotcha.
like, oh
Yeah.
my God, there's all these cool people
Cool
who
people.
are
Yeah.
just like tricked there
No,
by
that's
like
that.
big fees.
No, I think that is a good point. Tokyo, I mean, Japan's attracting a lot of foreign. It's like you said, there's a lot of people who are very interested in Japan. They just kind of need the welcome mat. And but yeah, so there's Japan without actually without the storytelling. because of, I guess, the quality of life here, a lot of people do want to come in and help. But no, I agree 100%. There is no storytelling for, let's say, the ecosystem. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, that makes perfect sense.
I think that's something that ideally like VCs get better at, or like, to be fair, a lot of our colleagues who are investors are coming in from like, finance backgrounds, consulting backgrounds. It's not necessarily something that comes naturally, which is to be like, a meme creator, content creator, internet personality, right? Although I know some of our Japanese friends are quite good at it in Japanese, speaking to other people domestically, right? But in terms of people who are like master meme creators, I haven't really
Yeah.
quite seen it. But I will say, by the way, this is something I've seen in other ecosystems in Asia, right? Even in places like Thailand, there's a guy named Dr. Kid, and I remember like super vividly when I was in San Francisco. I moved there in 2019. He was like making this whirlwind trip. I saw him like in three different offices just when I was like randomly there visiting. He would like come in and he's like huge, tall Thai guy, huge
Yeah.
personality. Yeah, spoke English and like nobody knew where he was coming from. He was
Yeah.
literally like a medical doctor. And like fast forward a couple years, like he did these like huge international conferences in Thailand, like raised a fund off of this thing,
Oh,
and just,
wow.
yeah, and just like came from literally nowhere, but like networked the hell out of it for Thailand, which again, Thailand's great. I lived in 2 years in Thailand, but it has far fewer things going for it than Japan in terms of
Japan
like
does, yeah.
substance and funding and founders and startups. And it feels like, Portugal has like a web summit, right? And like Portugal, right?
Yeah, it's
But how about Tokyo? Everybody loves coming to Tokyo. But we don't really have like a cohesive, compelling narrative that's like kind of, and you have so much you could draw on for that. Like people like Silicon Valley nerds and geeks and weeaboos, so fascinating with like the dreams and visions of the future from like
yeah.
90s anime, right? And like this mecha stuff. And even pair like Gary Tanner are talking about like San Francisco. We gotta make like bring all the good things from Tokyo and bring it to San Francisco. I'm just like, well, why don't we,
Yeah,
be
exactly.
part of that story and like get I feel like in some ways it's easier to get the San Francisco stuff here than, build, world-class infrastructure in San Francisco. But like,
But one friend was just telling me that if we just create more content for the startup ecosystem because it's lacking when Silicon Valley actually starts to get more interest and we actually have enough content, like they'll actually probably reach out to us.
yeah, 100%. And doing the newsletter, I found that to be the case, right?
Ah,
Like some interesting people reaching out. And now I think you'd be surprised like the amount of like latent interest there is in Japan. And again, kind of the sad thing is like I think very, very little of this is truly being captured by the ecosystem right now. And a lot of it isn't really being, in some cases, like really even acknowledged by the domestic ecosystem.
mm.
And
Oh,
hopefully we can do something about that.
could you mention a little bit more about your newsletter?
Yeah, so here's a quick plug. I do a newsletter with my friend Jeremy Kai Proctor. It's called Venture in Japan. It's kind of a weekly news aggregator, kind of aspirationally weekly, covering kind of relevant news about startups. We try to make it like as close to the ground as possible. We also try to kind of browse and try to scrape social media posts to give people just like kind of kind of a kind of slice of life view of um, what somebody working in startups and venture would be reading and looking at each week. And we were trying to be a little bit more ambitious about it, also kind of cover like funding rounds and such. And moving forward, we're hoping to do a little bit more kind of deeper analysis of the kind that you would see done by really good content creators on the space and writers in Silicon Valley and beyond.
Awesome. And also I might get, so I guess if there are, let's say, some high net worth individuals who want to support the startup community. We would accept some donations so we can create more content. I'll still be putting I'm putting about probably 20 to 30,000 a year now in it, but some donations would be awesome. That could let us create more content. But I'm very passionate about supporting the startup system, the ecosystem, because I didn't have that in 2014. And so we're going to continually push the barriers. And Kenneth and we probably have about 10 VCs. We're working on creating an ebook on fundraising in Japan, and we're getting the help of the VC community and knowledgeable people like Kenneth to proofread it and help out. So I'm looking forward to release that in November, I think.
Oh,
Is
awesome.
reason.
Yeah, everybody, back Tyson, and if you have a moment, come and take a look at Venture in Japan, and we are also open for donations. And
Oh,
we do
awesome.
keep it as a free and open resource, but both Substack and Jeremy and I
You guys are doing it for
gladly
free. Yeah.
explore,
Yeah,
yeah,
you guys are
gladly
doing
accept your support.
Yes, please support them. I mean, in my case, I do get what's the inbound business. So I think it's going to pay off in 2025. It's kind of paid itself up, but they're doing it completely out of, let's say. So please show your support so they continue, because they do provide really good news and updates in one place for busy professionals like myself. So I would highly recommend it. We'll link to it in the show notes.